Greetings hobbyists, this is Untitled, and in this video we're going to make working hinges for a 28mm piece of scenery. So here we've got my door and it's been sculpted to make it look like wood. This actual frame is going to go onto a building, so I'm not actually worried about the fact that there isn't a wood texture there. And we've got my wooden door that's been made effectively out of some simple planks that we've designed, and then we've got connected together with this set of 3 planks at the back. So pretty close to what we might want for a medieval or fantasy door. And we're going to make this so that it works as a door. We're going to put some hinges on this, so that if we're playing this or using this in our games, we can have this door opening or closing. Now this is a relatively beginner-friendly tutorial. I'm going to talk about some relatively complex bits just in terms of the design process, but the tools we're going to use are relatively simplistic, so this should be pretty beginner-friendly as long as you are happy with the basic interface. I'm also going to do this without using any of the add-ons that I normally would do, with the exception of the Machine Tools tab menu, just as a quicker way of getting to vertex, edge and face mode. But as always, you could just press tab if you didn't have that, and then once you're in your modes, because you press tab, either come up here for vertex, edge or face, or type 1, 2 or 3. So let's get back into this, and finally, to make this easier to see, I'm going to get rid of these wooden textures because they're going to get in the way for now. So I'm going to get rid of those and just bring in a simplified door, which you'll notice has the same structure, and a simplified wooden frame, which follow the same size. Is just to make everything easier to see. So the first thing we need to accept, and I'm going to go into this straight away, is we're not going to be able to make this work just using 3D printing. We're going to have to involve some other bits, mostly because, well, at 28mm scale, this is really tiny, and I've got a resin printer, and anything I print in resin isn't going to be strong enough to work as a hinge. It's going to snap. And if you were to use this, or to do this in plastic, I doubt you're going to get the resolution needed to make this in 28mm, though if you're doing this bigger, you could definitely do this just in plastic. So I'm going to use a metal rod here, and I've got a metal rod that I've purchased, and it's 0.6mm in diameter. So I'm actually going to start with that. I'm going to press Shift and A, I'm going to bring a mesh, I'm going to bring a cylinder, and I want this cylinder to be, well, let's up the vertices to 64 so it's a bit more round, and I want my diameter to be, well, 0.6mm. Now, obviously this is radius, so all we're going to do is type in 0.6 divided by 2, and we've got my correct radius. And now we've got that, we can put this into approximate position. So I'm going to G and maybe say the hinge wants to be about here, and then Z, and then move that out so that it's here. And I'm going to press Y to constrain that on the Y-axis so it's in the right place. But we'll be able to fiddle around with this later. So there we go. Now I also think I need to lengthen this to try and make this as strong as possible, and actually it's not going to cause any problem at the moment to have this wider than it needs to be. So I'm going to press S, and then I'm going to click on my middle mouse button, hold it down till we get onto the Z axis, let go, and then I can scale on the Z axis, or you could have just pressed Z. But this is a new tool that I found recently and I'm trying to make the most of it, and click. So we've got this longer than it needs to be, but that's fine for now. So let's start with the basic shape of our hinge, and there's a couple of ways of going about this, but I'm just going to bring in another cylinder, but I want this cylinder to come in centered on this. So I'm going to come into Object, Snap, and then I want to snap the cursor to selected. And if you've got Machine Tools, that's much easier. Just press Shift and S, and then you can go to selected there. So it is useful having Machine Tools, and that is a free add-on. It's well worth having. And then Control and A, and I want to mesh, and I want to bring in another cylinder. Now at the moment that's coming in at exactly the same size, and I want to make this bigger. Just as a side thing, if you click off of this and you haven't done anything else, if you press F9, you'll get that menu back up here. So again, F9, as soon as you bring your mouse off of it, it's going to disappear. There we go. So F9, and then you can move it around as you want. Now I want my radius to be wider than this, and in fact I want it to be, let's say, around 0.8mm wider. So what I'm going to do is come in here and press plus 0.8. I could do this a millimeter wider, but that might be a bit much, and even this is looking quite large. This isn't going to look perfect in terms of scale as a hinge, but sometimes we have to make those sorts of sacrifices. So let's come in here, and I'm going to have to move these around. So I'm going to shift select both of them. So that's selecting the first one, Shift select. At this point I've just realized that I don't have my screencast keys on, so I'm just going to fix that. So let's do that again. So click there, hold down Shift, click the other one, so we've got both. Come into the Z, and then I'm just going to move that G and Y so that it's not interfering with the object here, so we're not getting in the way of this. So now we need to make this so that we can connect it to our object. So we're going to effectively make what would be the metal section bolted to the door. So let's go into Z-axis, and then I'm going to select the object that I want to manipulate, and I'm going to go into vertex mode, and then I'm just going to select these vertices here, basically up to halfway, and I'm using that origin to know what's halfway. I'm going to press S to scale, and then you'll notice, oh, I haven't actually got all the vertices selected. That's because Blender doesn't work going through objects unless you go into X-ray mode. So I'm going to go back to my Z-axis, Shift and Z to go into X-ray mode, and I'm actually going to select exactly the same thing again, but now they're all going to be selected. So if I come back here, you can now see they're all selected. Back into Z, and then I'm going to press S again, and I'm looking at the top here. I want this scaled on the Y-axis, so I'm going to press Y, and then I'm going to press 0, and you'll notice that makes it a nice flat line. Click to enter, and then we've got this looking a little bit better. Now I'm actually going to press G and Y again and move that out to somewhere around there. So let's have a look at that. Looking pretty good. Now we do have a slight issue that at the moment this is not going to attach to our door frame perfectly. So let's shift select that, G and X, and I'm just going to move that along to the side there. So that's looking a lot better. Now, in the name of strength, we're going to make this hinge a little bit more exaggerated than we normally would. So we're going to make this a lot wider, covering up quite a chunk of this bar that goes across. So again, S and Z, and let's scale that up to somewhere around there. That looks a bit better. And I'm just going to move that down, so G and Z, so it's a bit more centered. And now that I'm happy with this, I'm going to start working on this side as well, the bit that's going to connect to the frame. I could start this again, but that just seems to be a waste of time. What I'm going to do is actually split this into two. And to do that, I'm going to use a Boolean. So I'm going to come back to my object. Notice that now, because we've moved it, the center point isn't where we have the cursor. So I'm going to go do the same thing again. So object, snap, cursor to selected, and then I'm going to shift A, and I'm going to mesh and bring in a cube, and this cube's far too big. So let's S and Z, and we're going to go to somewhere there, really quite thin. But I do actually want a little bit of thickness to this, because when we print, there's going to be a little bit of potentially expansion on the things that we 3D print, and I need to take that into account so that we don't get parts grinding together. Then I'm going to scale this up, so S, but I want to scale it in every direction other than the Z-axis. So all I'll do, if I press Z, it will only scale it on the Z-axis. If I press Shift and Z, it will scale it on every other axis except for the Z-axis. I'm going to make that nice and big to about there. Essentially, the bigger the better. Just make sure that it's covering everything that you need to cover. So effectively, it's gone all the way through this object. And now we're separating this perfectly in the center of this object, so it's going to look nice and even. Now, this is going to be a relatively simplistic hinge. We're going to have one part that's going to connect to this bit of wood or the door. We're going to have this part that's going to connect to the door frame. If you want something more complicated, you could easily split this into two or make two versions of it. So if I press G and Z somewhere there, Shift and D to duplicate and Z and do it there. This way we'd have it in three, but that's probably going to be a little bit weaker in terms of having our metal rod go through it. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just pressing Control and Z to undo that. Now, we're going to Boolean this out, but instead of using an add modifier and then Boolean, there's a much quicker way that's really useful to have. So I'm going to press Edit, Preferences, come over to here and to add-ons, type in Bool, and then we've got Bool Tool, and we want to click that box so it's activated, and then come down here and save preferences, or if you've got auto save preferences on, as soon as you've done that, you can close it. And what that will allow you to do is click on the object that you want to have cut out of the other, shift and click the object you want it cut out of, and then you just press Control and minus on your number pad, and you can see we've got this hole that's gone through it. We've essentially deleted out, because it's a difference Boolean, because we can press Control and minus this from our object. And then all we're going to do is we are going to click here and we're going to click Apply. you'll notice I've probably got some options up here that if you're a beginner you might not have, so I'm not going to use those. There is a video with a link in the top right hand corner of how to get those, which is quite useful, so you can click apply all if you've got a lot of modifiers, but for now I'm just going to click here and apply. Then I can get rid of this cutter, I don't need it anymore, so I'm just going to hide that. So I'm just going to get rid of it there. Now I've got this object split in two, but one of the bits is facing the wrong way. That's not very useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these into two separate bits. So I'm going to tab, go into vertex mode, or for you, if you don't have machine tools, tab and press 1, and then I'm going to press P and separate by loose parts. And now, if I tab out of that, I've got one part here and one part here. So we're doing pretty well. Now I want to have one of them rotated round so that it is facing the door frame. And I want this to be the bottom bit so that the door or this hinge basically sits on top of that. So all I'm going to do is checking that the origin is still in the center, which it should be. I haven't fiddled around with that. I can either come into Z view and press R, and then you'll notice it's perfectly working, or if I'm out of that, I can just press R and then Z to constrain it on the Z axis, and you can see this blue line comes up, and I'm going to move it round. Now you've got two options here. One, in the top left hand corner, you've got how much you're rotating it by, and I need it to be -90, or you can just type in -90, hit enter, and you've got that done. Easy. Now we are going to have to extend this hinge out, so all I'm going to do is go into face mode. If you haven't got machine tools, then just tab and then press 3, and I need to select all of these faces here. And this is one problem with the way that we've generated this. It's created a lot of faces. So what I'm going to do is, just to make this easier, I'm going to press / on my number pad to go into isolation mode, and I'm just going to select that face, and all I'm going to do is hold down Control and then click here, and it will select this across the shortest path, and if I just press F, it will turn this into one single face. Basically solving some of our geometry problems. It wasn't entirely necessary, but it is a good way of doing it. And then I'm going to press / again to get out of that isolation mode. And then all I need to do is press G, and I can start moving this around, but I only want to move it on the X-axis. I know this because I'm looking at the gimbal here for what the X-axis is. So G, X, move that out till we get pretty close, but not quite touching my door frame. So now we've got something that's going to work. We're going to have a hinge and it's going to be able to rotate. We just need to connect this to our door. And I want to make something that looks right for this. So now I need to add the metal section that would be attached to this bit of the door. So there's several ways of doing this. I think the easiest in this instance is going to be to go into edge mode or vertex mode, press Ctrl and R while I'm on this face, click, and then just move it along a bit to somewhere around there. And then all I can do is tab to go to face mode if you've got machine tools. If not, just type 3 or go up to there and click. Select that face, and I'm going to press E and extrude it out however far I want it to be. Let's do something like that. And that looks fine, but it looks a little bit boring. So just to add a little bit of interest, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press S and then Z and scale it a bit on the Z axis. So we've got something that looks like that. Bit more interesting. Now we are going to have to connect this metal object to the door, and you'll notice we've got this gap here, so that's not going to quite work. So knowing this, I'm going to press / to go into isolation mode, select all these faces, and you'll notice we've still got this problem on this one. So I'm actually going to fix that. So there, Control click to here, press F to make that one face, and then I'm going to keep these two faces separate, and then I'm just press G and Y, and I can move that out a bit. And I'm just going to exaggerate this so that when I press / you can see that's gone into the door. Nice. Now let's do the same thing for our door frame. So let's zoom in. And we're going to do exactly the same thing again for this one. So I'm going to go into edge mode. So I'm going to press Ctrl and R, and you'll notice that I can do this for bits of it, but it's not going to go all the way around, which doing these loops should do. So to make my life easier, I'm going to fix some of the geometry here. So I'm going to press / to go into isolation mode, and I'm actually going to go into vertex mode. If you don't have machine tools, just type 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this so that this section here doesn't have an engon. Now what an engon is, if you don't know, is that this face is an engon. it means that it has more than 4 vertices and it has more than 4 edges. If it's got 4 edges, we'd call this a quad, and that's what Blender likes. So you can see that even though I fixed all of these faces here, we've still got all of the vertices left over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this in a number of ways. This isn't essential, but it's just a good thing to do because it makes life a little bit easier. So all I'm going to do is press Control and click up to there. So notice I've selected this one, not the one on the corner, the next one. And then I'm going to go all the way up to the corner here, pressing Control, and I'm going to press M to merge at last. And then I'll do the same thing at the bottom. So there, and then Control and click, M at last. And then I also need to connect these bits together. So I'm going to click that vertex, shift click that vertex, and press J to join them. And we'll do the same at the bottom. Click, shift click, J, done. And now, when I press Control and R, it makes a loop all the way around. So I'm just going to escape that, press / so I get a good idea of how far this is going. Control and R, and I'm going to do that to, let's say, there. And at that point, we can do exactly the same thing that we did for our hinge that's connecting to the door. I'm going to go into face mode, select that one, and actually what I'm going to do, just to be a bit lazy, is shift click that one, and then I'm going to press E to extrude, then I'm going to press escape so that we can't actually see the extrusion, but it is still there. And then if I just press S and then Z, I can extrude those up, something like that. And again, this is not going to quite go into the door. I'm going to fix this a slightly different way this time. I'm going to go into vertex mode, Shift and Z, select all the vertices there, and then just G and X just to draw them in. So we've got this overlap, and you can see that overlap if you go into X-ray mode with Shift and Z again. And at this point, we're basically done. We've got our hinge. We can add details to this if we want to. So for example, we might want to add some rivets to this to make it look right. So actually I will do that. I'm just going to come here and then I'm just going to press Shift A, mesh. Now, if you've got machine tools again, you've got a quad sphere, and a quad sphere is going to look better for this and cause you less problems, because if I go into edge mode, you can see this is made up of, well, quads. But if you don't have machine tools, you can press Shift and A, mesh, and then if you pick a use V sphere, that'll be fine. I'm just going to come into isolation mode to see this, except for you've got this point at the top where all of our edges join together. We don't like that. It causes us some problems generally when we try to bring everything together. So what we need to do to resolve this problem is make sure that that point isn't going to interact with anything we don't want it to interact with. So we're going to have to deal with this. So what I'm going to do is / to isolate this, and then I'm just going to press R, X, so it's on the X axis. Again, I want it on the red line. I can see this red line here, so R and X, 90. And what that's going to do is that's going to mean that this bit that's a bit problematic is not going to be cutting anything that we want to join it to. You'll see what I mean in a second. Next, this is far too big for a rivet, so let's S and scale it down to somewhere about there. We could have done this when we brought it in, and then G and somewhere about there. And then coming in here, G and Y, and let's do that. So I generally leave this so it protrudes a little bit more than halfway. I find this useful when painting. Let's have a look. That's generally in the middle. So I'm going to press Shift and D to duplicate it. I'm going to press X to keep it on the X axis, and let's put another one there. Perfect. Now I could do the same on this hinge here, but it's not really going to be visible where this is, and actually it could get in the way, but I will do this down the bottom. So I'm going to grab that, Shift select this item, so we've got the hinge and the ball that's going to be our rivet. I'm going to press / which will isolate both of them, click off, click on our rivet, and again R, this time Z, and 90, so that again we've got this problematic bit facing away from the object, or not going to cause us a problem with the object. Come here and then G and bring that down to somewhere around there. Let's have a look at this. Well, it's not centered. What I'm going to do is put that so that it's right or approximately centered there. Good. / to get out of that. And let's start bringing everything together. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to Boolean this to our hinge here. And I just realized I did something very stupid there of moving that across without duplicating it. What an idiot. So Shift and D, X, and let's put that back there. So let's start bringing things together. Let's click that object. We're going to join this to the hinge, but actually I can do this for two objects at the same time. So if I shift click the second and shift click the last, whatever the last one is what everything's going to be Boolean to. Press Control and plus this time because we want to join it. And you'll notice we've got two union Booleans that have been set up. And all I need to do is come here and click apply. The other option is if you hold over it and press Control A, it will also apply it. Now you'll notice here, we've still got the original objects just here. So if I just press H, that will hide that one. Click on there, and that will hide that one. Now we've got my whole hinge. And we're going to do the same here. Click, shift click, Control and plus, apply, and then H to hide that. Awesome. So this is looking pretty good. All we need to do is sort out the bit where our metal joint or metal rod is going to go through. And now we need to have, again, a slight bit of consideration and think about how this is going to work in reality when we actually print it. Now, this is 0.6 millimeters in diameter. If I press N and come to item, you can see my dimensions here, 0.6 in diameter. But that would be the perfect fit for this rod. In fact, it'd be too close to perfect, because actually normally this will be slightly expanded when we print. So I actually want to give a bit of a gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this in size, and this is going to require you to, well, spend some time printing basically, because it's going to vary depending on your printer and how much you've got it dialed in. I'm going to add about 0.2 of a millimeter. So I'm going to change this to 0.8, and you'll notice that's only done it on the x-axis, and then I'm going to come to the y-axis and 0.8 there as well. The other thing is I don't want the rod going all the way through because, well, it will just fall out. So I'm going to press G and Z and I'm going to raise it up so that we've got a little bit of space at the bottom that's going to stop the rod going all the way through. And at this point, I need to delete this from these two objects. And we can do that, but we have to do it one at a time. So I'm going to click here, shift click on my hinge and Control and minus. You'll notice that this has gone see-through. Then I'm going to click this, shift click the other hinge and Control and minus that as well. And then all I need to do is just apply or Control and A while holding over it. And then I can H to hide this. And we've got my hinge there, and here we've got that hinge there as well that our rod can go through. Finally, let's bring this all the way up. So Shift and D and Z. I'm going to put another one on this top section of the door as well, so we've got our two hinges. I could do 3, but that's probably going to be overkill. And here we've got our hinge, and we just need to attach these to our frame and our door. But before we do that, there's one other thing that I need to consider, and I just want to mention it and show you how to test for it. So first I'm going to get rid of these simplified versions of the door and the door frame. So let's press H to hide that and H to hide that one. And I'm going to come to my object outliner and I'm just going to make visible the door and the frame. And we can see we've got this positioning about right. So nothing to worry about there, though, because this wasn't perfect. I might actually grab those and then those. I'm just going to G and Y those so that they're a little bit more in the correct place. So something about there. That looks about right. So when we've got hinges that work in this way, you've got to realise that actually as the door opens or closes, in this instance it's going to have to open towards the camera here, that there is going to be some movement as the door goes round that might mean it hits this frame. So you want to check that that's not going to be a problem. Now, because of these cylinders and their origin being, well, if I just hide this, perfectly in the center of the pivot point, we can actually test this out relatively easily as long as we know what to do with the settings. I'm just going to make that frame visible again. So what you need to do is you need to select the door and then select one of the hinges last. You could select both the hinges as long as it's one of the hinges that is last. And then up here where we've got the transform pivot point, we need to change that to being the active element. At the moment it's the median point, so if I press R and Z, you'll notice it's going to rotate somewhere approximating the average of where the origins are of the door and the two hinges. If I change this to the active element, you'll notice that because the active element is one of the hinges, if I press R and then Z, it will go round that pivot point. And if I come to, let's say here, I can press R and I can check if the door is going to hit the frame of the door frame. And no, it's not. We've got a little bit of a gap there, so this will open perfectly fine, and then we'll go to there and it will be closed. So that's going to work out all right. So now all I need to do is Boolean everything together. So I'm just going to grab those. So shift click the second one, shift click the door frame, control and plus, and then I'm going to control and A and control and A, and then I can H and H to hide that. Then select the two parts of the hinge that are going to become joined to the door, select the door, and again control and plus, and then control A and control A. You do have to make sure your mouse is over the thing that you're applying when you do that, and then H and H for that. So now we have our two parts. We've got, if I move that over, the door with our hinges, or the upper parts of the hinge, and then the door frame with the lower parts of the hinge. So let's get these 3D printed and let's check out how this looks. And here we can see the wooden door, and we've got that wooden texture, and you can see where I've put those metal rods in, and all I'm going to do then is put them in the door, and then I can just slide them into place, and then this is our final result. So we've got our wooden door in our frame, and it pivots really nicely on those metal rods. They're going to be really secure, so we've got no concern about that breaking, and there we go, ready to go and be put on our scenery. I hope you found that interesting, and you've got a few techniques that you might take away and use for some future projects. Have a great day, guys.